Hello there, good people. It's Shauna Johnson, and this is World War III Ideologies. On Tuesday, July 12th, we had some explosive testimony during the Treason Day trial. And I went ahead and wrote up my own analysis, and instead of just expanding on it, I thought I would just read it to you because it's already long enough. And I know some people like to read it, and you can find it on my Patreon, patreon.com/Shauna Johnson. And some people like to listen to it, so that's why I'm providing this on YouTube. I'm still trying to figure out the podcast thing, to be quite honest. This old dog's trying to learn new tricks, but I promise I will get it figured out sooner than later. And with that, let's begin. July 12th's treason trial testimony was nothing but explosive. From the moment the committee began their opening statements through Representative Cheney's closing, the four chosen to question the witnesses dropped bomb after bomb. This was the shock and awe portion of the treason trial, making it necessary to write down because so much happened, it's difficult to remember everything. Therefore, I'm going to sit here and go through every moment of what was said and give my feedback based on what we already know in hopes that will help all of us see the entire picture. Here we go. The opening statement, or as I like to call it, the lecture to the MAGA NatCon kids about America. Representative Benny Thompson kicks off the hearings as the committee chair has always done. His opening is a lesson in the importance of voting and accepting the results of what the people choose. You can always use the law in protesting if it appears there's been fraud or if you dislike the results, but you cannot get violent, as that is not the democratic way. As President of the United States, Donald Trump should have led his base towards the peaceful transfer of power. But instead, he chose to lead his, quote, army for Trump to war against the United States. He hands off the opening statement to Representative Cheney, who alerts the country they have spoken to the White House lawyer Pat Cipollone, whom they believe told the truth, and they're satisfied with his testimony. She informs us that today they will focus on the timeline between December 14th, when the Electoral College met to certify the election, all the way through the start of the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, along with testimony from a duped member of the masses whose life has been ruined due to his inability to recognize what is essentially a false prophet. He's here for himself as penance for causing the deaths of and injuries to police officers, we will later learn. But he still hasn't broken free from the MAGA Nazi cult and cannot assert that President Biden won the election in a voice free from doubt. But I digress. Let's return to the trial. Like a good mother, Cheney points out that Donald went from the election was stolen, so the treasonous insurrection isn't his fault, to he was getting bad advice from those around him, so again, it isn't his fault. Neither of these excuses are true. This grown man made a conscious choice to listen to, quote, outside mediocre business people, the crazies, instead of trusted advisors, and agreed to attack the USA thinking he would win and thus get away with it, making him Doge for life. Okay, that last part wasn't exactly said by Cheney, but it's being said by me. Anyway, let's get back to it. Today, the Treason Day Committee will put that lunacy to rest, says Cheney, and prove Donald isn't an ignorant, petulant child he pretends to be, but a calculating demagogue looking to end democracy and create a dynasty in his name, Trump. The thought of this is repulsive. Donald knew what he was doing, and we shouldn't allow him to escape consequences because he was too stupid to know better, she says. He did know better. He knew he lost. He knew there was no evidence the election was stolen, and yet he chose to deceive his gullible base so they would, quote, fight for Trump and help him end democracy and rule the, quote, free world, I put that in quotes because he didn't want to rule the free world. That wasn't his intention. He just wanted to rule the world. Anyway, although he knew he was completely full of crap, she says, and risking the financial and actual lives of his base, risking their freedom even as well, this Pied Piper sang the song necessary to lead his base to attack the United States. And with that, Representative Cheney yields back to the chairman, Representative Thompson. He then passes things off to Representative Murphy of Florida, whom I think was placed on the committee due to her home state, along with her intelligence and legal prowess. She reviews all the fights Donald started in the courts, trying to stop the certification before December 14th, that lacked evidence and thus failed every single time. Donald even calls various states like Georgia, asking if they can find him more votes or simply say that he won despite the totals. And when none of this lunacy works and the election is certified on December 14th, Donald begins executing their Hail Mary contingency plan, stopping the peaceful transfer of power at all costs. It is time to call on his army for Trump that he had spent 4 years building with a tweet commanding they come to D.C. on January 6th to defend his big lie and retain power until death. The army for Trump was made up of his base, some of which showed up armed, she says, while others did not. Now, not everyone there was a soldier, but rather a weapon themselves, she points out, as the massive amount of people would be necessary to overpower the guards while also keeping them from firing on such a large crowd, which would most certainly result in more carnage. This is why Donald manipulated the masses into believing the election was stolen and thus worthy of a massive protest. They could then turn into a riot as the people were swept up in the rage created by Donald and others. The plan was to incite them even further on the steps of the Capitol, as Donald was supposed to give another insightful speech on the steps outside where the votes were officially being counted, and then lead them into battle against the government of the United States of America. And I just want to sidebar off into this, but had he given that speech, I am betting a lot more of the Capitol Police officers would have taken up arms against the liberals on their team. Representative Murphy lets us know they will lay out the timeline of the planning of Treason Day from the time all hope was lost in declaring the election was stolen to the day they attacked. From a plan to seize voting machines to editing his speech at the ellipse in order to inflame the crowd. We will hear about the contentious meetings during which the criminal faction of Donald's outside advisors, bent on war against the United States, freedom, and democracy as the means to get their way, fought with patriotic Americans who had no desire to end their lives with treason charges. Today's hearing will also focus on Donald's call to arms, his tweet saying he needed his followers in D.C. on January 6th, and it was, quote, going to be wild. While he may have been speaking in code with its going to be wild, his army for Trump knew they were being called to a wild battle and not a peaceful protest. Next, Representative Raskin is up to give his opening remarks. He begins his timeline 4 days after all hope seemed lost, when the crazies, the outside lawyers who kept losing case after case trying to declare elections fraudulent, returned to the White House to offer up the only possible way Donald could cling to power and save them all. The crazies, as they were called undoubtedly behind their backs by the cowards, came armed with an executive order that first demanded the State Department seize all the voting machines, which was an idea they rejected as it was impossible without the evidence to do so. Instead, Donald and his team of ne'er-do-wells determined their only course was to plan an attack against the Capitol that would allow them to delay the counting of votes long enough for the SCOTUS judges in their pockets to give them the help they needed. In my opinion, it makes sense at this point to say Donald and his team called up Ginny Thomas to ask Clarence what the corrupt Christians on the SCOTUS bench could do, if anything, if he was able to delay the count. Whether or not Donald or anyone on his team contacted a SCOTUS judge or someone close to one, this is a safe bet, as he went from being angrily hopeful to joyfully assured this plan could work and all hope was not lost as they thought at the beginning of the night. I will be correcting that for my book. Obviously, something got deleted somehow. Anyway, believe it or not, Donald listens to and respects his lawyers. He counts on them to tell him the rules he must play by, which allows him to figure out how to bend those rules. Lawyers are his most valuable asset. He's been using the law against itself for so long that he's well equipped to suss out all the possible loopholes to exploit to ensure a win without cheating in a way that will send himself to prison. Donald knows what he's doing. He brought in the, quote, by-the-book lawyers with morals and at least a minimal amount of respect for the rule of law. Then he brought in the crazies who will think outside the box and may come across a blade of spaghetti that sticks. And finally, he finishes with the immoral lawyers who earn their positions by cheating and stepping on people to rise to the top and thus are willing to help bend the rules in the most cleverest of ways. For these reasons, I think after the lawyers left, he contacted Ginny himself, personally, to find the loopholes and work them. They came up with a violent insurrection to declare martial law, allowing them to go with the plan the crazies had and seize the voting machines everywhere in case of, quote, sabotage. And thus, the tweet read round the world was tweeted, "It's going to be wild." It seems this sudden jolt of energy from this possible late-night phone call was so exciting, he couldn't wait to call his people to arms and made this tweet at almost 2 a.m. In order for this new plan to work, he needed the masses to show up. But that wasn't all. Donald also needed his military wing, the Proud Boys, and his elite special forces, the Oath Keepers, and, most importantly, the help of his vice president. After 4 years of pushing around Vice President Pence, a guy too afraid of women to disobey his wife and be in the same room with another woman without her, Donald thought it would be easy to get Pence to go along with his plan. I don't think that he thought for a moment that Pence wouldn't. Pence was supposed to be the easiest part of his plan. What Donald and others ignored was that Pence had a lot to lose and wouldn't hand over his future and legacy to Donald. We will get to that. The point is, Donald thought they had designed a foolproof plan to keep that squatter in the White House. And the only way to explain that is he had buy-in from enough people in enough positions of power to believe this was remotely possible. Now, back to reality, not mired in my conjecture. Representative Raskin continues his opening remarks by giving us a history lesson about President Lincoln and his views on angry mobs, specifically racist angry mobs, attacking America without consequence, quoting a speech he made after one such event during which an editor of a newspaper was accosted. This inspired Lincoln to warn Americans that it was only Americans who could destroy our country, and that would be done the moment we allow this type of behavior, as we have seen this scene take place throughout history, and we know what to expect. And right there, I want to interject, he was talking about when kingdoms would keep taking over kingdoms, and it was war after war after war, which led to the Enlightenment era, led to the Age of Reason, and that is what President Lincoln is alluding to in 1860, not even a century into the revolutionary time, if you will. Using President Lincoln, the credited founder of the Republican Party, in order to shame the Republicans by reminding them what their party stood for was obviously a choice made in hopes to wake up some more MAGA-lite, as I call them. He furthers his point by speaking of social media and the internet as a way of growing the mobs President Lincoln knew destroyed democracies. Donald Trump obviously knew it, and he exploited this. We return to Representative Murphy now, recalling the events of December 14th, which ended with Joe Biden given the title of President-elect. The following day, Senator McConnell affirmed the results, speaking on the floor to congratulate the President-elect. Afterwards, many Republicans, putting love of country over love of Donald, called him, asking that he concede, if not now, then at least after he had exercised all legal options. Everyone around him, save those known as the crazies, kept doing everything they could to stop him. But they did not tell the American people that Donald has lost his damn mind and wanted to overturn the election and become dictator, of course. Representative Murphy then shows clip after clip of witnesses testifying on camera that they were honest with Donald, telling him his plot to overthrow democracy would never work. Everyone with a title to lose refused to participate in subverting democracy while also lying to Americans about what Donald planned. They even went so far as to yell that we were the crazy ones to think that the house was on fire while they were starting multiple fires in the house. These people are no heroes, but rather cowards forced to talk now that their plan went down in flames. She says she would love to show testimony of Mark Meadows, also saying that he told Donald to concede and move on. But Mark Meadows refuses to testify, and they're still in litigation to force his testimony. That could mean Meadows wants a deal the DOJ isn't willing to give him in return for his testimony. In my opinion, he probably hasn't flipped yet, nor will he, as they don't need his testimony for his crimes. Even with the deal, in my opinion, he has not flipped yet. Nor will he, as they don't need his testimony, and his crimes, even with a deal, lead to at least a decade in jail. May as well go for broke at his age. As we continue to watch these clips, the point of showing them becomes clear. Donald led this coup attempt. That is what they're proving today. He knew it was wrong. Any sane person of sound mind who knows right from wrong and doesn't belong in a jail cell in Guantanamo Bay knows they not only should not have led an army to attack the United States, but they should have also known not to continue the big lie that the election was stolen. And Donald knew, beyond a shadow of a doubt, Representative Murphy is proving with witness testimony, as a rational, sane person who's been a CEO for decades, that the election was not stolen, and he had indeed lost to, quote, Sleepy Joe Biden, who Republicans called a saint, before falling to their dark master. After a multitude of people are shown testifying to Donald's guilt, she yields to Representative Raskin. Representative Raskin kicks his time off by reasserting that Representative Murphy has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that Donald knew he had lost the election and that Joe Biden was now the president-elect. He reiterated that all of Donald's legal options had been exhausted because, quite simply, they never had evidence worthy enough to overturn the election results. And with that, he moves forward on the timeline to December 18th, 4 days after the people's choice for president-elect was confirmed. This is where it starts to get really interesting, as if you weren't already listening to this, mouth open, thinking, holy cow, that's some explosive testimony already. December 18th is the day of the meeting that we will forever be known as the, quote, unhinged meeting with the crazies. Sidney Powell, Mike Flynn, and their brew crew roll up to the White House, and a junior staffer let them in to talk to Donald about the plan they've cooked up. With them, they have an executive order drafted that they're hoping Donald signs that demands the Secretary of Defense seize, collect, retain, and analyze all voting machines. Apparently, this is the genius plan they came up with during what must have been a liquid luncheon at Trump International Hotel, because you'd have to be loaded to think this would work. I do find it very suspicious that they chose the Secretary of Defense for a job the State Department should have done, and then goes on to plan an attack on the Capitol. That's too much of a forced coincidence to think that it is one. Let's stick a pin in that, as Maddow says. Back to the genius plan they cooked up at the Trump's hotel. This plan required Sidney Powell be named special counsel, and that she be given carte blanche to arrest anyone and everyone who stood in her way of conducting the investigation she wanted to conduct. He then shows a clip of Pat Cipollone saying he thought this was a batshit crazy idea, and that everyone knew he didn't think Sidney Powell should be appointed to anything, much less special counsel. The camera cuts to a smirking Representative Rasky, who doesn't have nor have the need for a good poker face when he knows they're winning their argument in favor of charging Donald for everything quite handedly. Pat Cipollone is then shown testifying on camera last week, saying the crazies kept insisting the election was stolen, and he kept demanding they show evidence. Quote, put up or shut up, he said. Pat is then asked if he thought that what was drafted in the executive order was a good idea or not. Pat seems astounded that anyone would ask such a ridiculous question. Of course it isn't a good idea for the Department of Defense to seize the voting machines and conduct an illegal investigation like this is some kind of banana republic. And I have to ask, why does the guy who didn't alert the country as to what was going on in the White House have to explain to anyone why this was Why, says the guy who didn't alert the country as to what was going on in the White House, have to explain to anyone why this idea was so absurd? Anyone can see what should have and shouldn't be done. Anyone can see what should and shouldn't be done. He says out loud, without realizing he didn't do what we all think is obvious he should have testified before now. I will fix that as well in my book. The December 18th meeting solidifies the evidence that Donald knew what he was doing was wrong and illegal, as the crazies and the intelligent lawyers on staff fought about this for hours as Donald looked on. He heard all the arguments and watched the inside people say over and over what was and wasn't legal, while the crazies argued that this is what they should do even if it was a little illegal. That those who are willing to bend the rules and give this a try were, as Giuliani put it, being pussies. I personally prefer limp dick since pussies are strong, but that isn't important, so let's ignore that interjection. Anyway, Representative Rasky showed us a clip of Cipollone testifying that everyone kept asking for evidence from Donald. Time and again, they told Donald to concede unless he could bring forward evidence of his claims of a stolen election. When that failed to materialize, they wanted him to concede, yet he refused. He still refuses to concede. Heck! The Republican Party still refuses to concede the presidential election after 2 years and an insurrection. Rasky then asserts that Giuliani's own lawyers even admitted by now that there was no evidence to overturn the election, and at this point, quote, if the president plans on winning, it's the legislators that have to be moved, end quote. it becomes abundantly clear that evidence never existed, no matter how hard they tried to find it. They finally admitted this, with even Mark Meadows saying it was time to concede. And yet Mark Meadows still chose to spend the following 3 weeks leading up to Treason Day helping Donald stay in office by all means necessary, including one that ended with the deaths of Capitol police officers. To bring this point home, we're shown Cassidy Hutchinson, Mark's chief of staff, testifying that once it became obvious they couldn't overturn the election by saying it was stolen as they couldn't prove it, Mark Meadows started to dive into possible loopholes they could exploit to keep Donald in office. And that's when John Eastman and his theories enter into our timeline. We stop there because Representative Rasky wants to focus on the unhinged meeting on December 18th that included the fighting between the crazies and the cowards. He says Powell, Flynn, and the Overstock guy all showed up at the White House, and some junior staffer allowed them entrance. They went up to the Oval Office for a meeting with Donald, during which they had his ear without anyone else in the room. At some point, White House staffers heard of the meeting, and one can only imagine how fast Cipollone booked it to the White House to stop the madness that was obviously taking place. The crazies and the cowards fought for 6 hours, yelling and screaming obscenities, while almost coming to blows at various times due to how unhinged this meeting was. We're informed the Treason Day Committee has already spoken with 6 attendees of this contentious meeting and some staffers who were able to hear the commotion from outside the Oval Office where the meeting had taken place. He then began showing clips of witnesses attesting to how unhinged the December 18th meeting was. We start with Sidney Powell testifying she was able to get a meeting with Donald in the White House without anybody on the White House staff knowing. Mark Meadows, chief of staff, sees that they're meeting with Mark Meadows, chief of staff, sees that they're meeting without Mark Meadows or anybody else's knowledge, so she alerts staff, and Cipollone can't get there fast enough. He sets a new land speed record, Powell says. Pat comes in and sees that the crazies are in the Oval Office, and to say he is displeased is an understatement. He walks in and sees the normal nutty cast of characters, and then turns to see the Overstock guy, whom he's never seen before, and promptly asks him who he is. Pat says not a single one of these crazies were providing Donald good advice and couldn't understand why anyone would have let these crazies in. We cut to Powell, who's holding a Diet Dr. Pepper like she's getting sponsored by them and is annoyed that her commercial is being interrupted by this hearing. She narcissistically points out that she was there alerting Donald of some obscure rule that nobody else was smart enough to tell him existed, and he was intrigued by her genius idea. Then she takes a long drink from her soda can. I can't help but think she reminds me of an evil librarian. Pat is then shown testifying of all the ridiculous theories the crazies were throwing at him, which included some crazy theory about a Nest AC controller doing something or another to affect the election. He's laughing to himself about the absurdity as he speaks. We then see them ask General Flynn about this unhinged meeting. And he, of course, asserts his Fifth Amendment rights. So we skip over to a staffer who heard the meeting and describes it as obviously contentious and not a, quote, casual meeting, end quote. He describes the yelling and insults being thrown throughout. We are then shown Powell, who says people were being very disrespectful and disdainful to Donald and scoffing at their theories to keep Donald in office. And then Pat saying that they didn't have the evidence. Pat kept asking the crazies to back up their feelings with facts, and all they got were more feelings that Pat and his staff lawyers should know as much as they do, that they won't tell him. I can't imagine having to have a discussion with these people. I'm surprised nobody was thrown out of a window due to pure frustration. Powell says if she was Donald, she would have fired everyone at that meeting and replaced them with her. Donald agreed, as he said the crazies were the only ones with solution to keep him in office, while the others were too big of pussies, if you will, and quitters to make sure they won this already lost battle, no matter the cost. The unhinged meeting seemed to end exactly where it started. Nowhere. There were no solutions, and the plan by the crazies would not be implemented. In fact, Mark Meadows was captured walking Giuliani out of the White House so he wouldn't wander back up to Donald's residence to talk more nonsense. Then we see Sydney testifying that she actually believed Donald had named her special counsel and gave her clearance, to which everyone said he could do whatever he wanted, but nobody was going to obey his idiotic and illegal orders. His response to her was that people do this to him all the time. They just ignore him. But Donald never followed up on any of this, which means she was never given that title or clearance officially. It is now Sydney's turn to get the Rasky treatment. He shows evidence that Sydney acted as though everything she said and did was the truth and honest. Then he shows that when taken to court and sued for defamation by Dominion Voting for her false assertion their technology wasn't up to the task of keeping our elections secure, she argued in her defense that nobody would believe the ridiculous statements she made to Donald or anybody else at that infamous meeting. Everyone leaves just after midnight, and then at 1:42 a.m., Donald tweets his call to arms to his army for Trump he spent the last 6 years building. His goal was to get a crowd to D.C. on January 6th, as they were needed to make his plan of taking the presidency by force possible. He repeats the big lie, saying it wasn't possible for him to lose, and therefore there must have been election fraud. He tells those he told earlier to stand back and stand by to be at D.C. on January 6th. Quote, "Be there, will be wild," end quote, he tweets. Immediately, his followers responded to his call. Right away, organizations supporting Donald changed their events planned for January 20th to January 6th, and Ali Alexander made a website to publicize the, quote, "wild protest." All of a sudden, everyone was mobilized to get as many people to D.C. on January 6th, and they had no time to waste. It was the holidays, December 19th, and just 3 weeks before the counting of the votes on January 6th. There was a marketing offensive, with every right-wing talking head and conspiracy theorist telling their followers to get to D.C. for this wild protest because Donald needed them. Everyone, from Tim Pool to Alex Jones to everyone in between, were talking about the, quote, rules of engagement, which meant if enough people were at D.C., they will keep the police from firing on the crowd and they can overtake the government of the United States. At this point, we are provided audio clips of a Twitter employee describing their fears of violence at the Capitol on January 6th due to Donald speaking directly to his followers about a wild protest. This person testifying with a voice distorter says that Donald's call to arms was immediately answered by his followers, who made it apparent they would be there locked and loaded and ready to fight for Trump. So concerned with this Twitter employee that they took their concerns to the top and hoped something would be done. Obviously, nothing was, and that Twitter employee, who didn't tell Americans what they were seeing and feared would happen, felt secure in knowing that they had done their due diligence in trying to stop people from dying in a mass slaughter. We return back to the time when Donald told his army for Trump to stand by and stand down, which is when this Twitter employee first started getting concerned. Donald was now speaking directly to them rather than out into the void, and his people were responding. This employee asserts that anyone else breaking Twitter's terms of service in this manner, like Donald would have been banned a long time ago. Yet Twitter had made the conscious choice to continue allowing him on their platform. This, in my view, gives Twitter some culpability and grounds for injured police officers to sue. We fast forward to the tweets seen around the world calling the Army for Trump to battle that happened at 1:42 a.m. on December 19th, kicking off the right-wing marketing machine. The Twitter employee says it was obvious that Donald was gathering his army at this point to fight, which increased the fear of that Twitter employee. Donald's ask and the response to his call for arms was now focused directly on those he wanted to incite when needed, and now they were needed. Donald had given his army cause, and his army responded to him that they were locked and loaded and ready for a Civil War 2.0. We are then shown an overwhelming number of tweets by his base, asserting this was a necessary battle and the least they could do for their demagogue Jesus warned them about. All of them show that his base was responding to Donald's care and nobody else. Pardon me, that should read, all of them show that his base was responding to Donald's call and nobody else's. Tweets from Donald's deplorables were shown that exemplified their bloodlust and disregard for the rule of law and the lives of Capitol police officers. Despite all of this, Donald never called off his dogs. We are shown film testimony of the owner of the website, thedonald.win, who sits behind a desk wearing a Reagan Bush 84 shirt to show how respectful he is of his flag and our country. He didn't kneel, though. He says it was Donald's tweet who brought him to D.C. and why he hosted a site full of violent rhetoric about how they would fight and kill members of Congress. It doesn't appear this guy has any remorse. To be honest, it doesn't seem any of these Confederates have any remorse other than that they lost yet again. And with that, the first half of today's hearing is over. Everyone leaves the courtroom after the Capitol Police protect our leaders as they leave. And I can't believe that Republicans were willing to watch people they see every day who protect them at the Capitol die in a crowd full of angry Republican voters. Republicans have been priming this crowd for incitement for years and still are with their constant talk of overthrowing the government with their Second Amendment rights. I will be finishing the second half of this testimony at some point, and then I will continue this series with today's testimony. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you give me a thumbs up if you like what I'm doing, a thumbs down, whatever, maybe even a follow or a subscribe or what have you. But I would love some type of feedback from you, maybe a comment, questions you have, anything at all. Again, I appreciate you for taking the time to listen to what's going on during World War III ideologies.